Story 1. It was our 7th grade field trip to the State Arboretum, and I remember feeling excited, not because of the trees or the botany lecture, but because we were allowed to roam in pairs for an hour. I stuck with Ryan, my best friend since 2nd grade, and we decided to venture a bit off the trail. Nothing reckless, just curiosity. The Arboretum had these old, disused paths that were half-eaten by weeds. We followed one that curved downhill toward a small creek. That's when we saw it, an old metal bench, sunken into the earth and covered in moss. Odd placement, considering it wasn't on any current map or trail. We sat, shared a water bottle, and joked about how it looked like a perfect place for a ghost story. Typical kid stuff. But as we were getting ready to leave, we both noticed something odd. There was a jacket neatly folded on the bench next to us. Neither of us had seen it when we first sat down. It looked dry, despite the ground being damp. Ryan reached for it, but I stopped him. Something about it felt staged. I wish we'd left immediately. We started back up the path, but it didn't lead where we expected. It should have curled around to the maintenance trail, but instead, we ended up in a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. No paths, just forest. Ryan tried his phone. No signal. I laughed nervously, trying to hide my unease. But then he pointed at something through the trees, what looked like another bench. Same moss, same rust, same folded jacket. We hadn't circled. We had walked in one direction. "I think someone's messing with us," Ryan said, trying to sound calm, but his voice cracked. We decided to cut straight through the trees, figuring we'd hit the main trail eventually. We didn't. Every few minutes we'd come across another bench, always with the same jacket. The 4th time, I swear the jacket wasn't folded anymore. It was slumped, like someone had sat in it. That's when I lost it. I started yelling, calling for help, for our teacher, for anyone. Ryan joined in. There was no response, just birds and leaves and the low hum of wind that had started up again. Eventually, we stumbled out into a parking lot, but not the one we'd come from. This one was empty, faded lines, graffiti on a cracked brick wall that read, "No way back." We walked until we hit a road, then followed it for what felt like an hour. A delivery driver eventually pulled over. We didn't recognize the town name on his GPS. It took 3 more hours for someone to come get us. The weirdest part? The Arboretum swore there was no path where we described, no benches like that. And our teacher said we were only missing for 40 minutes, not 5 hours. Ryan never talks about it. But last month, he texted me a picture of a rusted bench in the woods behind his apartment. It had the same jacket. Story 2. It was a high school trip to a historical mining town turned museum. We were a small class, only 10 of us, and we had a tour guide who looked too young to really know the history, but he was enthusiastic. His name was Joel. I remember because he insisted on first names and said things like, "History is alive here." By the 3rd stop on the tour, we were already lagging behind. I stuck with Sarah, my lab partner and sort of crush, because everyone else was getting bored, and we both actually liked creepy old places. The tour took us down into an old mine shaft that had been converted into a walking tunnel. Lights strung along wooden beams, the smell of wet stone, and that constant dripping echo that made every step feel louder than it was. At some point, Sarah whispered, "Do you see that?" Ahead of us, Joel was turning a corner with the rest of the group, but just to the right, down another corridor that hadn't been part of the tour, there was someone standing. Not moving, not blinking, just standing. I tried to make out details, but it was too dark. I thought maybe it was one of those mannequin displays, like a miner holding a lantern or something, but it was wrong. It didn't have that stillness. It was more like it was waiting. Joel's voice echoed from around the corner. "Guys, you with us?" I looked at Sarah. She was staring down the side corridor, frozen. When I turned back to that figure, it was gone. We caught up with the group. I didn't say anything, but Sarah grabbed my arm and whispered, "That thing. It was closer." We told Joel, half joking, that we saw a weird miner standing in the tunnel. He laughed, said there hadn't been actors in years, that budget cuts ruined all the cool stuff, said maybe we saw a shadow. Then he paused. "You didn't go into the right-hand tunnel, did you?" We shook our heads. He looked uncomfortable, then waved us along. "That part collapsed a few years ago. We blocked it off, but people keep moving the signs. Just stay with the group, yeah?" After that, the tunnel felt colder. We finished the tour in silence, and I could tell Sarah was watching every shadow. But it didn't end there. That night at the hotel, she knocked on my door around midnight. Her face was pale. She showed me a photo she'd taken during the tour, a blurry, accidental shot of the tunnel when she must have hit the shutter by mistake. In the corner, just above a collapsed beam, was a face. Not in a ghostly way, not transparent or glowing, just a pale face, half lit, watching from the dark. I told her it had to be a trick of the light, pareidolia, dust and shadows. She nodded, but didn't sleep in her room that night. 2 years later, she sent me a message out of the blue. He was in my dream. Same face, same tunnel, still waiting. I never replied. Story 3. Our elementary school had this annual overnight field trip to a nature center in the mountains. I was 10. It was the first time I'd ever slept away from home without family. I remember the excitement turning into a weird unease as soon as we arrived. The place was surrounded by these looming pine trees that blocked out the sky, and even in the afternoon, it felt dim. We were split into groups and assigned cabins. I ended up with 3 other boys, Aaron, Tyler, and a quiet kid named Leo who barely spoke. He always looked like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. That night, after dinner and a bonfire, we were sent back to our cabins. Our counselor did a quick check-in and left us for the night. The room was filled with the usual rustling of sleeping bags, whispers, and muffled laughter. Somewhere around midnight, I woke up. Not because of a noise, but because it was too quiet. I couldn't hear the wind in the trees anymore, or the frogs, or the creaking of the old cabin wood. Just nothing. A silence so deep it felt like pressure in my ears. Then I noticed Leo wasn't in his bed. I sat up, scanned the dark, and saw the door was cracked open. Cold air drifted in. I whispered to Aaron and Tyler. No answer. They were out cold. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped outside, barefoot, into the damp leaves. The cold bit hard. I spotted movement just past the tree line. Leo, standing still, facing away from me. "Leo," I called. He didn't move. I walked closer, probably 10 or 15 feet away, and said his name again. This time, he turned, but not all the way, just enough to glance at me over his shoulder. His face didn't look surprised or scared, just blank. Then he whispered something I couldn't hear. "What?" I said. He pointed deeper into the woods. That's when I saw it. Another person. Or something. Standing further back. No flashlight. No face I could make out. Just a silhouette. Tall and still. Leo stepped toward it. I don't know what instinct kicked in, but I ran to him, grabbed his arm and pulled hard. He resisted at first, then stumbled after me as I dragged him back to the cabin. The second I slammed the door shut, the sounds of the night returned. Wind, creaks, a distant owl. Everything felt normal again. Leo climbed back into bed without a word. I watched him until I fell asleep. The next morning, he didn't remember anything. Swore he never left the cabin. Our counselor brushed it off as sleepwalking. But later, when we were boarding the bus to go home, I saw something etched into the wood outside our cabin door. 4 words, scratched deep. He goes where called. Leo moved away a month later. I never saw him again. But sometimes, late at night, I dream I'm back in that forest, and someone's whispering my name from just beyond the trees. Story 4. In high school, our history class took a field trip to an old Civil War battlefield about 2 hours from our town. It wasn't the usual big-name tourist site. This one was less developed, a bit forgotten. No flashy exhibits, just open fields, a few cannons, and a crumbling visitor center. Our teacher, Mr. Daly, loved the place. He said it was less commercial, more authentic. I just remember the grass being too tall and the air feeling heavy, like the land didn't want us there. We were allowed to wander in groups of 3 for part of the afternoon, and I ended up with Marcus and Jen. We stuck to the main trail until we saw an overgrown path behind a broken fence. There wasn't a sign saying, "Not to go," so of course we went. The path led to a small clearing with a single tree in the middle, charred black like it had been struck by lightning. Around its base were little wooden crosses, probably 50 or 60 of them, arranged in neat rows. Some had initials carved in, some were blank. Marcus joked it was probably a Boy Scout project or something. Jen didn't laugh. Then we noticed a smell, like sulfur and wet ash. Faint but present. It didn't match the dry grass or the breeze we'd felt minutes earlier. And then my phone buzzed. A new photo in my gallery. I hadn't taken one. I opened it and felt my stomach twist. It was a photo of the clearing, but taken from behind me, from just over my shoulder. You could see the 3 of us, backs turned, looking at the tree. I showed them. Jen immediately started crying. Marcus turned pale. He said it had to be a glitch, some kind of mirror image from the phone's motion sensor or something. We left in a rush, cutting back through the tall grass. At some point, we lost the path. The battlefield was mostly flat, but the trees started closing in, even though there hadn't been any forest on the map. I swear, we walked in circles for half an hour. I kept checking my phone. Each time there was a new photo, all from behind. All of us, getting closer. Finally, we broke through the brush and stumbled back onto the main field. A guide was standing there looking annoyed, said we were past the allowed boundary. We didn't argue. We got on the bus and didn't say a word the whole way home. But the worst part came later. Jen transferred schools the following week. I didn't see her again. Marcus and I drifted apart. One night, months later, he messaged me, "Check your camera roll." I hadn't taken any pictures since the trip, but when I looked, the last image was there again. This time, it was just me, standing alone in that clearing. And behind me, right behind me, was someone tall, dressed in gray. No face, just a blur where the head should be. I deleted it. It came back. I don't take photos anymore. Story 5. In 8th grade, our class took a field trip to this old railway museum about an hour outside of town. I didn't want to go. I remember begging my mom to write a note, fake a dentist appointment, something. I had this gut feeling. No real reason, but the kind that settles behind your ribs and doesn't go away. She didn't listen. The museum was all outdoors. Rusted train cars, cracked platforms, overgrown tracks. Our guide was an elderly man who barely spoke above a whisper. His name tag said Elliot, and his hands shook when he pointed things out. He kept saying things like, "This place remembers," and "Don't touch what doesn't want to be touched." Most of the kids ignored him, taking selfies in front of the trains and goofing off. I stuck close to my friend Ellie. She was quieter than usual, watching everything like she expected something bad to happen. At some point, we lost the group. We'd followed the sound of wind chimes. Yes, actual wind chimes in a tree near the far end of the property. It didn't make sense, because there was no building nearby. Just a rusted train car, its door hanging open. Ellie looked at me. "Do you hear it?" "The chimes?" "No," she said, "the breathing." That's when I heard it too. Rhythmic, wheezy, like someone with a chest cold exhaling behind us. But when we turned, there was no one there. Just empty tracks and grass. We should have gone back then. Instead, we stepped into the train car. It was dark inside, the windows smeared with grime. There were no seats, just benches lining the walls. At the far end, something was carved into the metal. "We move without sound." The door slammed shut behind us. Total blackness. Ellie screamed. I pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then the whole car lurched, like it was suddenly hitched to a moving train. The floor vibrated, wind pushed against the walls. But outside the windows, everything was still. No motion, no tracks passing by, no scenery shifting. Just the static image of the museum grounds. We both started shouting, then silence. The vibration stopped. The air went heavy again. I got the door open, no idea how. We stumbled out, except we weren't where we had entered. The car had moved. It was now surrounded by trees. Not a single train in sight. It took us 20 minutes to find our class again. When we got back, no one had noticed we were gone. Not even the teacher. He said we'd only been missing for 5 minutes. Later, I checked the museum map online. That particular train car? It had been closed off for years. Structural damage, chained shut. Ellie won't talk about it. She blocked me 2 months after the trip. But last week I got an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single photo. It was that same train car, and inside the window, you could see 2 silhouettes sitting side by side. Only one of them was us. Story 6. This one happened during a college orientation trip to a retreat lodge in the woods, one of those team-building weekends they make freshmen do, so you bond before classes start. I had just transferred in, didn't know anyone, and was quietly dreading the forced icebreakers. The place was beautiful, though. Huge pine trees, cabins with stone fireplaces, and a glassy lake at the edge of the property. But from the second we got there, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were too quiet. Not peaceful. Hushed, like someone had told nature to hold its breath. I got paired with a guy named Cole. Seemed normal enough. We both hated the group activities, so we ditched after dinner and walked down to the lake. No flashlights, just the moon and the crunch of our boots. About halfway around the lake trail, we saw a dock we hadn't noticed earlier. It wasn't on the camp's little illustrated map. It jutted far into the water, longer than it needed to be. No railings, no lights. Just an old metal bench at the very end. Cole laughed and said, "Let's check it out." I hesitated, but followed. When we reached the end, I sat down. The lake was completely still, so calm it looked solid. Then Cole asked, "Do you hear that humming?" At first, I didn't. But then, yes. Faint, low, almost musical. It seemed to come from beneath the dock, not from the trees or across the water, from underneath us. I looked at Cole. He was staring straight down into the black water, leaning forward like he was listening with his whole body. Then he stood up and said, "I think I have to go in." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. He took off his jacket, placed it neatly on the bench, and started untying his boots. "Cole," I said, "seriously, what are you doing?" He didn't answer, just looked at me and whispered, "I saw her." Then he jumped. No splash. I swear to you, no splash. I ran to the edge and looked down. Nothing. No ripples. Just the same mirror-like water. I ran back to camp screaming. They sent out a search team, called the Rangers. Everyone was panicking. It became a full-scale rescue effort overnight. But here's the part that still messes with me. When they reviewed the surveillance footage, the camp had a few cameras near the main trail. There was nothing. No sign of me or Cole walking to the dock. No dock at all. Just trees. A blank stretch of shoreline. They showed me the footage. I swore they had the wrong location. But they didn't. They never found Cole. 2 weeks later, the school placed a plaque near the lake, in memory of a student lost to the waters. I went back the following year, out of some mix of guilt and obsession. The dock wasn't there. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear that humming. And once, I swear, I saw Cole in my dream, soaking wet, sitting on that metal bench, staring out at something I couldn't see. Story 7. When I was in 5th grade, our class took a trip to a small local museum that focused on the region's agricultural history. It was dull, the kind of place with wax figures of farmers holding fake pitchforks and glass cases filled with rusted tools. But our teacher, Mrs. Albrecht, insisted we'd love the interactive exhibit in the back barn. The barn was old. I remember the air inside smelled like dust and mold, and the wood floor creaked like it was tired of being walked on. A museum staff member guided us through the displays: wooden butter churns, hay-cutting blades, even an old blacksmith's anvil. The rest of the class wandered off, distracted. I stayed close to the staff member. He was in his 60s, thin and hunched, with cloudy eyes that didn't quite focus. His name tag read Martin, but he never introduced himself. He brought me to the far end of the barn, where a small, roped-off room sat behind glass. Inside was a single chair, an old, high-backed thing with worn red velvet. Just sitting there in the middle of the room, no context, nothing else around it. Martin leaned close and said, "That's the listening chair. People used to sit there to hear what the land wanted." I smiled politely. "Like stories?" "No," he said. "Like warnings." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He didn't laugh. That's when I noticed the sign next to the glass was covered in thick dust, like no one had cleaned it in years. I rubbed it with my sleeve. It read, "Do not tap on the glass. Do not speak while looking at the chair. If you hear something, leave immediately." I stepped back. Martin was gone. I looked around. Just other kids, milling about, bored. I told Mrs. Albrecht about the old man, but when I pointed him out, he wasn't anywhere. I described him. She said no one by that name worked there. I checked the staff board at the front. No Martin. No one who even resembled him. That night, at home, I had the dream. I was back in the barn. The red velvet chair sat in the center of the empty room. I was on the outside of the glass again, but something was sitting in the chair now. Not a person. Not exactly. A shape, like it was still being formed. Its head was turned toward me, but it didn't have a face. I couldn't look away. Then it leaned forward and whispered something I couldn't hear, but in the dream, I understood it perfectly. "You were supposed to listen." I woke up with blood coming from my left ear. My mom thought it was a nosebleed that had traveled somehow. The doctor called it a ruptured capillary. I never dreamed of the barn again. But sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, I hear a whisper from across the room. Not words, just the sound of speech, too soft to understand. Like something still waiting for me to listen properly. Story 8. My senior year of high school, We went on a weekend field trip to a state park known for its limestone caves. It was supposed to be a geology trip, measuring rocks, studying erosion, boring stuff like that. There were 12 of us and 2 teachers. We stayed in cabins, and the night before the cave tour, my friend Marissa and I decided to explore a narrow trail behind our cabin. It wasn't marked, but it looked worn, like others had used it before. It led us to a sunken clearing, more like a shallow crater. In the center was a wooden ladder descending into a round shaft of rock. No signs, no safety barriers. Just there, waiting. Marissa was immediately drawn to it. "It smells sweet," she said, kneeling beside it. She was right. It didn't smell like dirt or mold. It smelled like fruit, overripe, fermented. Before I could stop her, she started down the ladder. I waited, called after her. Nothing. Eventually, I followed. The shaft led to a tunnel, then into a cramped stone chamber. Marissa stood in the middle, facing the wall, perfectly still. Her fingers twitched at her sides like she was grasping at something invisible. "Marissa?" I said. She didn't turn. Then I heard a whisper, right next to my ear. "Don't touch her." I whipped around. No one there. When I looked back, she was gone. The space she had stood in was empty. I ran. Didn't stop until I reached the cabin. When I told the teachers, they searched the woods. But they never found the trail. Never found the hole. Marissa was declared missing. Her parents thought she'd run away. No one believed me. I tried to forget. But last month, I got a photo from an unknown number. It showed a stone chamber, and in the center, someone stood with their back to the camera, arms down, fingers twitching. Beneath it were 3 words, "She still listens."